أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قال هذا فراق بيني وبينك سأنبئك بتأويل ما لم تستطع عليه صبرا أما السفينة فكانت لمساكين يعملون في البحر فعرضت أن أعيبها وكان وراءهم ملك يأخذ كل سفينة غصبا وأما الغلام فكان أبواه مؤمنين فخشينا أن يرهقهما طغيانا وكفرا فأردنا أن يبدلهما ربهما خيرا منه زكاة وأقرب رحما وأما الجدار فكان لغلامين يتيمين في المدينة وكان تحته كنز لهما وكان أبوهما صالحا فأراد ربك أن يبلغا أشدهما ويستخرجا كنزهما رحمة من ربك وما فعلته عن أمري ذلك تأويل ما لم تستطع عليه صبرا صدق الله العظيم. So Khidr alayhi salam, when realizing Musa alayhi salam was not able to bear with him, has expelled him from his madrasa, says قال هذا فراق بيني وبينك. He says that this is the separation between me and you. And he mentions himself first, that this is the separation between me and you, meaning I'm basically finished with you. It's up to you if you want to stay here, if you want to go wherever you want to go, but I won't be letting you accompanying me anymore. And then he tells him, سَأُنَبِّئُكَ بِتَأْوِيلِ مَا لَمْ تَسْتَطِعْ عَلَيْهِ صَبْرًا. And soon I will inform you of the explanation or interpretation of those things which you were not able to be patient upon. So as promised, now he explains to him all of the affairs that happened before. So أما السفينة فكانت لمساكين يعملون في البحر فأردت أن أعيبها. As for the ship, it belonged to some poor people who worked in the ocean. فأردت أن أعيبها. So I intended to make a flaw in it. وكان وراءهم. And after them there was a malikun, there was a king, يأخذ كل سفينة غصبا, who was taking every ship by force. So as we heard yesterday, Khadir and Musa alayhimus salam, they both reached to a place where they wanted to cross a body of water, and they were able to board this ship, and the people allowed them to board for free. But Khadir alayhi salam, whilst on board, he broke a board in the ship. So Musa alayhi salam objected that why would you do such a thing? So he's explaining to him here that actually this ship belonged to some poor people who would work on the ship, meaning this was their mode of livelihood. They would carry people across this body of water, this crossing, and they would charge people, and that is how they made their living. So I decided that I'm going to put a flaw into this ship, because further upstream there was a king, a ruler, who was seizing everyone's ship. But he would only seize those ships who were in perfect condition. So by me creating a flaw in this ship, I sort of secured the livelihood of these poor people. Because now the king won't seize their ship and they will be able to continue allowing people to cross. So that's the explanation of the first incident. Then وَأَمَّا الْغُلَامُ, and as for the boy, فَكَانَ أَبُوَاهُ مُؤْمِنَيْنِ, his parents are believers. فَخَشِينَا أَن يُرْهِقَهُمَا طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا, so we feared that he would pressure them into one, tughyan, transgression, and then later kufr, disbelief. So this boy, he was a non-believer, or his destiny was to be a non-believer. So the fear was that when he grows up, he will pressure his believing parents into transgression. As we see today, sometimes believing parents are very soft-hearted. They wish best for their children, they educate them well. But then when a child becomes materialistic, when he comes back home from his studies overseas or wherever he goes, and he's influenced by a certain environment, he brings forward that mentality to the household. Why are you guys fasting? What Allah gets from making you hungry? You don't need to fast. You're old now. Stop. And so forth. You guys really think there's a God who's listening to your prayers? No, we get through our efforts. We gotta work. We gotta do this. So maybe later down the line, because this child had kufr in his destiny, we feared that he will pressure his believing parents first into transgression and then into kufr. So فَأَرَدْنَا أَن يُبْدِلَهُمَا, so we wish that يُبْدِلَهُمَا رَبُّهُمَا, so we wish that the Lord of the parents would change for them a better offspring than him, zakatan wa aqraba ruhma, in piety, in purity, and also who is closer to them in caring. So our intention by eliminating this young boy was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their Lord, meaning the Lord of the parents, would give them a better offspring than the present one, who would be better in also piety and who would also be more caring for them. So that was the whole reason for murdering the boy. وَأَمَّا الْجِدَارِ, and as for the wall, فَكَانَ لِغُلَامَيْنِ يَتِيمَيْنِ فِي الْمَدِينَةِ, it was for two orphan boys who lived in the city. وَكَانَ تَحْتَهُ كَنْزٌ لَهُمَا, and underneath it laid a treasure belonging to two of them, or for them. وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا, and their parents, or their father, was a pious person. So فَأَرَادَ رَبُّكَ أَن يَبْلُغَ أَشُدَّهُمَا وَيَسْتَخْرِجَ كَنْزَهُمَا, so your Lord, your Rabb, intended that they both reach their maturity and they would retrieve their treasure, kanzahuma, their treasure. So this was the town where no one was even ready to give them a plate of food, right? And Khadir alayhi salam straightened the wall he saw in that town. So he explains that underneath this wall lay the treasure that was for two orphan boys. Now, if this wall was to topple over, and judging from the hospitality we got from the people of this town, we knew that they would not leave this treasure for these two orphan boys, right? They're not willing, they're not generous, they're hard-hearted people. Furthermore, they will leave the treasure that belongs to these boys for them when they grow up. So we straighten back up the wall so that when the time comes, these boys will find their treasure and later on they'll be able to attain it. So, rahmatan min rabbik, all of these were mercy from your Lord. وَمَا فَعَلْتُهُ عَنْ أَمْرِي, and I did not do them by my own accord. ذَلِكَ تَأْوِيلُ مَا لَمْ تَسْطِعْ عَلَيْهِ صَبْرًا, and that is the interpretation of what you could not be patient upon. So Khadir alayhi salam explained everything now to Musa alayhi salam. Now, what was the reason behind each and every action of his. So, it's a nice story, right? Yeah, but Quran doesn't give us stories for story's sake. There's some deep matters involved, and very, very deep matters involved in this story. So we're going to investigate all of them one by one. Hopefully we have enough time. Okay. The first matter to discuss here is وَمَا فَعَلْتُهُ عَنْ أَمْرِي. Khadir alayhi salam says in the end that I did not do any of these on my own accord, right? Meaning all of them was, as he hinted towards, rahmatan min Rabbi. These were all a form of mercy from your Lord. So I was commanded to do these things, right? Each and every action that I committed, whether it seemed wrong or right, it was done by the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I was ordered to do them and I carried them out. But you, Musa alayhi salam, you blamed me for each and every one, right? As he said yesterday in all of them, right? Akharakta. Did you put a hole in this boat? Aqatalta. Right? You killed this innocent person. Right? Then he said, Lattaqatta. Right? You should have took some sort of compensation. So everything Musa alayhi salam associated to Khadir alayhi salam. That you're the one who did this, you're the one who did that, and you're the one who did the third. So the interesting thing here is that Khadir alayhi salam in the end said, I did all by the command of my Rabb. Right? Now just try to fathom this for a bit. We have a saying here that what? Only dates and water allowed, or throw away a bottle, whatever it is, right? Let's say our masjid has a rule. Only dates allowed in the Jamaat Khana, right? Now tomorrow this young boy, Ayub, he got you inside the thing. He comes with a plate of food now and coming to somebody here in Jamaat Khana. And I see him, I stop him. Hey boy, where you going with that food? And he says, it's not me, it's the chacha that asked me to bring it for him. Right? That's our immediate answer. Okay? So in this story we're learning a bit of adab, a bit of etiquette of how we speak with regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? If we study the sentences I read today, right? Khadir alayhi salam says in the first one, فَأَرَدْتُ أَنْ أَعِيبَهَا. I intended that I create a flaw in it. Right? He is associating the wrongdoing to himself. Right? It would be very unethical and also against the adab that he would say, well, Allah command me to break the boat. This is not something good to associate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he associated it to himself. Okay? So that was the bad action. Now the good action, the last one, when he made the wall upright, which was falling over. Okay? What did he say when he came to that? فَأَرَادَ رَبُّكَ. That your Rabb intended, and يَبْلُغَا, that they reach maturity, right? وَيَسْتَخْرِجَ كَنْزَهُمَا, and they retrieve their treasure. So when it was a good action, who did he associate the good action to? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here we are being taught some sort of etiquette, right? That when we speak, we don't speak ill of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what about the middle one? That was murder, right? So he said, فَأَرَدْنَا. Most Mufassirin say that these are the words of Khadir himself. Right? Some say he is relating it. He is relating the words of Allah. But most of the opinion that because Musa alayhi salam questioned him, he's given him the answer. So these are the words of Khadir himself. So he said, فَأَرَدْنَا أَن يُبْدِلَهُمَا. Right? That we intended that يُبْدِلَهُمَا رَبُّهُمَا, that the Lord of the parents would give them in exchange. So he says, أَرَدْنَا. He did not say, like how he said with regards to the vote, right? فَأَرَدْتُ أَنْ أَعِيبَهَا. He didn't say, أَرَدْتُ أَنْ أَقْتُلُهُ. Because qatal is a very grave sin. So he did not repeat the crime in this one, right? He omitted the crime in this one here. He just said, we intended that the Lord of the parents will give them in exchange. And when it came to giving in exchange, he associated that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala too. Right? أَن يُبْدِلَهُمَا رَبُّهُمَا خَيْرًا مِنْهُ. So the bad part, because it was such a hideous crime, he did not repeat it. Right? And when it came to the good part of giving a better child, he immediately associated that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here in these few sentences, the first lesson to learn is the etiquette of speaking when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How should we speak with regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Right? So this is the first lesson to learn here. Now, the other lesson, this is a lesson of fiqh, is that it is no way permissible in Sharia, in our Sharia, to damage anyone's property, right? Even if you think you're doing it for a good reason, right? Someone buys a new car, he comes to masjid with it, and you tell yourself, you see this man, he's going to get arrogant, you know. So let me take the hammer from my toolbox and smash one of the lights. At least that will keep him low. That's najais, right? Oh, I read it in the Quran, so I could do it, right? Right? Because they did it, so I can do it. I saving him from arrogance. This is completely impermissible. You cannot damage the property of anyone, whether you intend good for the person or whatever. That is completely against the Sharia. Number two, you can't murder anyone either, right? For no reason, for no apparent cause. You can't murder. That's completely illegal. That requires no further discussion. So these are two things we must understand, because these ayats are ayats that the kuffar like to throw dirt upon the Muslims with and upon the Quran. That look, the Quran is condoning murder, is condoning damage of property. So to understand this, we must understand another point, which most people won't look into. And that is that the third lesson will be learned with that one thing too, is that everything that happens in this world has two different realities. One is the outside reality that we see, and one is the inside reality. Okay? So the ahkam and the commandments of Allah that relate to the outside reality, those are called the ahkam of Sharia, tashri'i ahkam in terminology, that's what you call them. And the ahkam that relate to the inside reality, or the hidden reality, behind the scenes reality, which I have been talking about for the last few days, those are called takwini ahkam, right, in terminology. So we have tashri'i ahkam and we have takwini ahkam. Now the inside reality of things, right, meaning if a person dies and the situation he dies in and how he dies, or if a person's property is damaged and how it's damaged and the situation in which it is damaged, like a hurricane or an earthquake, or maybe by some stranger just hitting your car running, whatever it is. Now the inside reality and the unseen reality behind how it happened and when it happened and what caused it to happen, that all happens under the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala too. And usually the asbab and the means leading up to the happening of those events are done by the unseen creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like the angels, right? So when the angels get their ahkam to send the winds to a certain locality and destroy certain houses, the angels do it, right? Because they are commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they carry out this command. So such is the case of this situation, is that Khadir alayhi salam was given these ahkam. Now usually, the usual context and how the world operates is this is usually done in the unseen, right? But this story of Khadir alayhi salam is an exception to the general rule, right? Allah allowed it to happen in the scene because there was a deeper purpose here, right? So the purpose of this is not condoning murder and condoning damaging of property, but the purpose of this whole incident between Khadir and Musa alayhi salam, and for the ahkam takwini, as I said, the unseen reality, the commandments related to the unseen reality happening in the scene, was done for a certain reason. And it was to give Musa alayhi salam a lesson, right? A lesson that there is another realm of knowledge that you have no understanding of, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to teach his Nabi this lesson. So that is why it was done in such a manner, right? Khadir alayhi salam was able to murder people, he was able to damage property, because it was done under the direct commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and it was supposed to be one of the unseen actions, but it was done in the scene for a particular purpose, and that was to teach Musa alayhi salam. So in no way the Qur'an is condoning murder or condoning damaging of people's property. So we cannot take these ayat and say, well, tomorrow I'm going to break windows, or, you know what I mean? Or I'm going to kill somebody, and then say, well, I was the messenger of Allah to carry out this command. No, because these commands usually happen in the unseen. You will be, qisas will be taken for you in the Islamic court if you go and do such. Okay? So that was another thing to get out of the way. And the third lesson here now is a deeper lesson. Okay? As I said, this was to teach Musa alayhi salam a certain lesson. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also related this whole incident in the Qur'an. Right? So it's not only to teach Musa alayhi salam a lesson, it's by extension to teach the people to the end of time, right, to the day of judgment, a lesson as well. Okay? So, as I said from the start, that in this surah, there will be continuously a lesson of how to combat materialism. Okay? So in this story is also a lesson of combating materialism. And this is a materialism to do with knowledge and thought process, because knowledge itself is a thought process, right? So in this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also relates this incident to save us from the materialistic thought process. Now, what is the materialistic thought process here? One, whether we have this inner thoughts, we have these inner thoughts consciously or subconsciously, right? That the regular thought process of people today is that life, right, has nothing more than what is explicable, meaning everything in life should be explainable. This is the general materialistic thought process. If it cannot be explained, it cannot be believed, right? If you go to university, you go anywhere, you answer students about certain things, they tell you, well, if it's not explainable, if the science can't prove it, we can't believe it. That's the materialistic thought process of today, right? The next thing is that in this materialistic time, people claim that the human being, right, he is the perfection of all knowledge, meaning whatever thoughts and conclusions the human beings comes to, that is it. There's nothing beyond the knowledge of a human being. So it's like human beings have encompassed every section of knowledge, right? This is another materialistic thought process. So there are two parts to it, right? One, that the human being has encompassed everything. If it cannot be encompassed by the human brain or by logic or by science, because human beings have practically understood and figured out everything, then it cannot be believed. Okay? So this surah is actually combating, or this section of the surah is combating this materialistic thought process. And is allowing us to know, right, that there's an outside reality to things, and there's also an inside reality to things. right? Things happen in the outside, in the seen realm, right? And we can probably comprehend those. But there's also things happening behind the scenes which are outside our comprehension. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed that in the story of Musa and Khadir alayhi salam. That behind the happenings of the world, right? And there are many happenings of the world which human beings today cannot comprehend. Why are so many people in the world starving? And whilst others are throwing away food, they have so much abundance on other places in the world. You know what I mean? Is there really a God? If there's a God, then why is this happening? These are the questions of people with materialistic thoughts, right? Atheists, they come with these type of questions, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows in the materialistic time there will be a need for this knowledge. So it was already related in the Qur'an that all of these happenings, why are the Muslims being slaughtered in such large numbers if we are on the right path? Questions arise even in the believer's mind sometimes. But why is this happening? Right? Innocent, over 1,200 innocent children have been murdered. Well, the death count is at 32,800 and something till today. So many Muslims being murdered. Why is this happening? Right? We're supposed to be on the truth. But as we can read in these ayat, there's also an unseen process of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does certain things which is outside the comprehension of the human being, right? Which can be paving the path for a better tomorrow, right? As we see in these ayat, the boat was damaged, right? So that it's not for a better akhirah, it was for a better dunya, that the boat won't be seized, right? The child was murdered. It wasn't for a better akhirah, that the parents will make sabr and in the akhirah they will get a big jannah. No, that wasn't the reason. The reason was that Allah wanted to give him in exchange a better child. So it was like one harm of dunya, so a harm of today for a better tomorrow in the dunya itself. So the doings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're being taught in this surah not to question the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As the first lesson I read out first, the way Khadir alayhi salam spoke when it came to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The goodness he related to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and whatever was wrong he related to himself. So this is giving us a lesson that when this wave of materialism comes and materialistic thinking comes, and people pose these questions, which may seem very logical to the human mind, right? This is the answer here. This is how to combat this type of thinking, right? The whys, why Allah is doing this and why Allah is doing that. The answer is, it's beyond my comprehension. I have not been given the knowledge of that. Why Allah is doing it, Allah knows best, right? And that's the answer, and that's the lesson to learn from this section of Surah Kahf, right? That when this materialistic type of thoughts enter one's brain, one is to think to himself that this is the takwini ahkam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? The unseen. These things that are happening are related to the unseen. And we cannot comprehend them. We leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we say, Allahu a'lam bis-sawab. Allah knows best why He's doing what He's doing. It's beyond my comprehension, and that's it. We don't carry the discussion beyond that. Because if we try to carry the discussion beyond that, we will end up either in kufr, shirk, or some type of transgression. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to understand the deeper lessons of the Qur'an. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanakallah wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta.